On June 29, 1991, as a horse-drawn carriage carried a beaming newlywed couple through Niagara Falls, Canada, a gruesome discovery was unfolding on a lake not far away.
We believe the party to be a female, young female. It could be between 14 to 24 years of age.
Fishermen had found blocks of concrete floating in the waters of Lake Gibson, each encasing human body parts. The very same day, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, an attractive blonde-haired couple, later dubbed the Ken and Barbie Killers, celebrated their fairy tale wedding. Little did anyone know, the body in the lake belonged to a girl they had sexually assaulted brutally and murdered just 2 weeks prior. This chilling contrast between outward beauty and inner depravity lies at the heart of their story. Were both Paul and Karla inherently evil, or did one mastermind seduce the other into a world of torture and murder? It's a question that haunts every chapter of the Ken and Barbie Killers story. Before Paul Bernardo became known as half of a killer couple, he was terrorizing Toronto's eastern suburbs on his own. In 1987, a series of vicious sexual assaults began plaguing the district of Scarboro. Women and teenage girls were ambushed near bus stops or dragged into bushes and sexually assaulted at knife point by a lone attacker. Over the next 5 years, at least 14 females, some as young as 15, fell victim to the Scarboro rapist, as the media dubbed him.
This suspect is wanted for a series of assaults, 2 last May and 1 just last week. And police say his attacks always follow the same pattern.
Fear gripped the community, and police formed a special task force in 1988 to hunt the Scarboro rapist. In 1988, investigators released a composite sketch of the suspected Scarboro rapist, hoping someone would recognize him. The sketch showed a young man with feathered blonde hair and boyish, soft features, hardly matching the monster's brutality, yet eerily close to reality.
Metro Police have a team of investigators working full-time on this case. They've interviewed and cleared over 1,000 possible suspects. They've even offered a $150,000 reward, but they still lack the key pieces to this puzzle.
Tipsters alerted police that Bernardo looked just like the drawing. He was indeed brought in for questioning in 1990 and even provided hair, blood, and saliva samples for DNA testing. Astonishingly, however, police did not peg him as a prime suspect, partly because he was deemed too clean-cut to perpetrate such evil crimes. After a brief 35-minute interview, they let Paul go, and his DNA sample then vanished and went untested for over 2 years. During those 25 months of delay, the maniac remained free to strike again.
Here she is, ladies and gentlemen, the sexiest girl in the world.
Amid this string of unsolved sexual assaults, Paul Bernardo met Karla Homolka, an encounter that would form one of the most infamous killer partnerships in modern crime history. It was October 17, 1987, and Paul was 23, a recent college graduate. Karla was a lively 17-year-old working part-time at a pet shop. They crossed paths at a hotel restaurant in Scarboro, and the chemistry was instantaneous. To outside eyes, they made a perfect pair. Ken and Barbie come to life. But their bond was forged as much by dark obsession as by romance. According to later accounts, the couple discovered a mutual fascination with deviance and cruelty. Paul was charming, but deeply controlling. He soon dictated what Karla wore, how she styled her hair, even what she ate. Karla, for her part, was eager to please and seemed enthralled by Paul's domineering personality. Bernardo fixated on Karla's purity, or what he saw as her lack of it. He cruelly nicknamed her used goods because she was not a virgin when they met. You see, Paul had a perverse obsession with virginal teenage girls, and this became a point of tension. Desperate to satisfy Paul's twisted fantasies, Karla offered an unthinkable solution. She would give him access to her own 15-year-old sister, Tammy Homolka, as a Christmas gift. If Karla couldn't be the virgin of Paul's dreams, perhaps Tammy could. It was a proposition so grotesque that it's hard to fathom any sister conceiving it. Yet Karla not only suggested it, she actively set it into motion. On December 23, 1990, the Homolka family's holiday season turned into a nightmare. That night, Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo put their sick plan into action. While Karla's parents slept upstairs in their comfortable suburban home, Karla invited her youngest sister Tammy down to the basement rec room for some drinks and movies. The 15-year-old, trusting her big sister, had no idea that Karla had already spiked her rum and eggnog. As Tammy sipped her drink and lost consciousness, Karla and Paul began their vile Christmas gift to Paul. They pulled out a video camera to record the event. Karla soaked a cloth in halothane and held it over Tammy's nose and mouth to keep her under, while Paul proceeded to sexually assault the incapacitated 15-year-old, all on camera. Partway through the assault, Tammy began to vomit and then suddenly stopped breathing. The intoxicants had overwhelmed her young body. In a panic, Paul and Karla tried frantically to revive her, but Tammy was turning blue. In that moment, the couple's first murder was underway. Though they did not plan to kill Tammy, their actions had fatally betrayed her. Thinking fast, Paul and Karla undertook a cold-blooded cover-up. They hid the evidence of the assault and carrying her up to her bedroom. Only then did they dial 911 for help, feigning desperation. When paramedics arrived, they found Tammy Homolka with no pulse, and curiously, a chemical burn covering much of her face. Despite this suspicious detail, emergency responders accepted Karla and Paul's story that Tammy had simply drunk too much and choked on her own vomit. Tammy Homolka was pronounced dead. Her death was ruled an accident, and no further investigation was done at the time. In the weeks after Tammy's tragic end, Paul and Karla behaved in ways that would only later reveal their true depravity. In a perverse scene, Karla even put on Tammy's clothes and pretended to be Tammy, while she and Paul had sex on Tammy's bed.
So what are you doing tomorrow, little girl?
I'm going to Disney World. You're gonna go ball.
Do you like Disney World? You don't know. You will. Do you want to meet Mickey Mouse?
The couple moved out of the Homolka house in early 1991 and rented their own small pink bungalow in the city of St. Catharines, near the shores of Lake Ontario. By that time, Karla was 20 and Paul 26, and they were engaged to be married. To the outside world, they appeared to be a loving young pair coping with a family tragedy. Inside their new home, however, even darker crimes were brewing. Tammy Homolka had been their first victim, but she would not be the last.
In the early morning hours of June 15th, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffy told the friend she was heading home, but she never arrived.
On the night of June 15th, 1991, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffy of Burlington, Ontario, missed her curfew. As punishment, her parents had locked the doors, intending to make Leslie spend a short time outside as a lesson. In the early hours past midnight, Leslie was alone on her front porch, unable to get in, and that's when Paul Bernardo found her. Seizing the opportunity, he approached Leslie with a knife. He forced a blindfold over the frightened girl's eyes and shoved her into his car. Leslie was brought back to the Bernardo Homolka bungalow in St. Catharines, where she would endure a nightmare that defies comprehension. Over the next 24 hours, Paul and Karla repeatedly sexually assaulted and tortured the 14-year-old, all while videotaping much of the abuse. On the tapes, Leslie can be seen crying and pleading for her life as the couple assaults her. Paul was the primary aggressor, a gleeful sadist, but Karla also sexually assaulted Leslie, and at times played the role of facilitator and videographer. At one point on the video, Karla can be heard egging Paul on and even mocking the sobbing girl. Paul and Karla later pointed fingers at each other for who ultimately killed the girl. Karla claimed that Paul strangled Leslie with an electrical cord looped around her neck. Paul had achieved his first killing of a stranger, and Karla had now graduated from helping cover up one death to actively sharing in another. With Leslie dead in their house, Bernardo and Homolka faced the grim task of disposing of her body. Paul, ever calculating, went to a hardware store and purchased several bags of cement mix. In the basement of the bungalow, he used a circular saw to dismember Leslie's lifeless body into smaller parts. The remains were then encased in cement. The couple hauled these heavy cement blocks to nearby Lake Gibson, where they dumped them in the water, thinking their crime would be sunk forever. Yet fate had other plans. On June 29, 1991, 2 weeks after Leslie's disappearance, a pair of canoeists on Lake Gibson happened upon pieces of cement with what looked like human flesh embedded inside. Authorities were called, and the gruesome contents were soon identified as the remains of Leslie Mahaffy.
We believe the party to be a female, young female. It could be between 14 to 24 years of age.
In a twist of dark irony, June 29, 1991, was also Paul and Karla's wedding day.
Hi, Karla. Hi, Paul. Best of luck. I love you both.
That afternoon, oblivious guests attended the lavish ceremony near Niagara Falls, where Karla Homolka walked the aisle in a flowing white gown, and Paul Bernardo donned a sharp tuxedo. The newlyweds rode off from the church in a gilded horse-drawn carriage, waving and smiling for cameras. News of Leslie's fate would soon spread, but no one yet suspected the smiling bride and groom. For now, Paul and Karla enjoyed a honeymoon in Hawaii, literally getting away with murder. The discovery of Leslie Mahaffy's dismembered body sent shockwaves through southern Ontario. Here was a bright, outgoing 14-year-old who had vanished from outside her home, only to turn up brutally murdered. Police were perplexed and alarmed. A killer was on the loose with an unfathomable level of cruelty. However, with no immediate leads, Leslie's case risked going cold. What investigators didn't know was that the perpetrators were an unsuspected young couple living quietly in St. Catharines. Bernardo and Homolka, feeling confident after evading detection, continued on with their lives and their crimes. In between the major crimes, Paul and Karla also preyed on at least one other victim, a teen girl who, remarkably, survived their viciousness, and whose name has been protected by the courts as Jane Doe. This girl was a friend of Karla's whom they had invited over prior to their wedding. On June 7, 1991, just 1 week before Leslie's abduction, Karla hosted a girls' night with this 15-year-old friend. Under the guise of a fun sleepover, Karla drugged the girl's drink with halcyon. When the friend lost consciousness, Karla signaled Paul to come home. Together, the couple sexually assaulted the incapacitated teenager, taking turns filming the assault. The next morning, Jane Doe woke up nauseated and with no clear memory of what happened. Karla cheerfully told her she had simply had too much to drink. The girl went home unaware that she had been victimized by people she trusted. A few weeks after their honeymoon, in August 1991, Paul and Karla decided to attack Jane Doe again, an incredibly risky move that nearly exposed them. Karla invited her young friend over once more, employing the same cruel trick of drugging her. As Karla and Paul began assaulting the unconscious girl, something went wrong. Jane Doe stopped breathing, perhaps from an overdose. This time Karla panicked. She actually dialed 911 to get an ambulance, but after a few frantic moments, the girl coughed and resumed breathing. This incident shows how far Karla was willing to go. She had initiated an attack on her friend without any direct coercion from Paul, and even when faced with the girl's potential death, Karla's first instinct was to cover up the crime. Jane Doe would only learn what had been done to her years later, when the horrific videotape of that night surfaced in police custody. On April 16, 1992, Kristen French, a 15-year-old schoolgirl, was walking home from her Catholic high school in St. Catharines. In the parking lot of a church, Kristen was approached by a woman who appeared to be lost and asking for directions. The woman was Karla Homolka, holding a map and feigning distress to lure the teenager closer. As kind-hearted Kristen stopped to help, Paul Bernardo sprang out of nowhere, wielding a knife. He quickly overpowered Kristen and shoved her into the front seat of their car. The abduction was brazen and rapid. Though it took place in a public area, witnesses only caught a glimpse of a strange car speeding away, and perhaps a vague description of a blonde woman with it. For 3 days, over the Easter long weekend, Kristen French was kept captive in Paul and Karla's home. What the young girl endured in that house is the stuff of nightmares. Paul and Karla forced Kristen to be their sex slave, subjecting her to repeated sexual assault, degradation, and physical abuse. Sometime on April 19th, after returning from Easter dinner, Paul Bernardo decided that Kristen French's time had come. He strangled Kristen to death, likely using the same electrical cord method he had employed on Leslie Mahaffy. With their victim now dead, the pair faced the familiar task of getting rid of the body. This time, they did not bother with dismemberment or concealment. They unceremoniously dumped Kristen's nude corpse in a ditch along a rural road in Burlington, not far from where Leslie's remains had been found. In a final act of indignity, Kristen's long brown hair had been roughly cut off, and her face was beaten, possibly post-mortem, in an effort to impede identification. Her body was discovered on April 30th, 1992, about 2 weeks after she was abducted. Kristen French's murder prompted an intense police response. By now, investigators recognized that the killings of Leslie Mahaffy and Kristen French bore a striking resemblance. 2 teenage girls, both abducted in daylight, both raped over a period of days, both killed and discarded within roughly 45 minutes of each other's last known locations. The authorities realized Ontario had a serial killer on the loose targeting schoolgirls. A multi-agency task force was formed, and tips poured in. Notably, the police began to consider a connection to the Scarboro rapist case, the unsolved sexual assault spree from Toronto. The notion that the prolific rapist had escalated to murdering his victims fit the timeline. In fact, a few shrewd officers had already interviewed Paul Bernardo back in May 1992 as a possible suspect in the disappearances of Leslie and Kristen because of a tip from one of Paul's friends. At that time, Paul had smoothly talked his way out of suspicion. But now, by late 1992, with pressure mounting, police at last sent his long overdue DNA sample for testing. In December 1992, the forensic lab's results came back. Paul Bernardo's DNA was a match to the Scarboro rapist. After years of frustration, the predator's identity was confirmed. But those years of delay had proven costly. As a 1996 official report later stated bluntly, these sexual assaults and murders could have been prevented if Bernardo's DNA had been tested earlier. As 1993 began, the once seemingly idyllic Ken and Barbie couple had been living with mounting tension. Paul had a vicious temper and frequently beat Karla. The abuse culminated in a horrific incident on January 5, 1993. On that day, Paul savagely attacked Karla with a flashlight, leaving her with 2 black eyes, deep bruises, and a broken rib. Karla was photographed after the beating, her face so battered as to be nearly unrecognizable, hidden behind dark sunglasses. She finally decided enough was enough. Under the guise of visiting a friend, Karla fled the house and sought medical treatment, where she confessed to doctors and family that Paul had been assaulting her regularly. This domestic assault turned out to be the key that unlocked the whole case. Karla filed charges against Paul for wife abuse. Crucially, she also began speaking to the police. On February 1st, 1993, around the same time that Bernardo's DNA match came through, Karla Homolka met with detectives and started to divulge what she knew. At first, Karla was hesitant, likely trying to protect herself. But within days, her story poured out in shocking detail.
I want to do everything I can for you to put that bastard away forever. He doesn't even deserve to live, but I want him to rot in jail because dying's too good for him.
Karla painted herself as a victim of Paul's brutality. In her initial statements, she claimed Paul had coerced her into everything, that he beat her and threatened to kill her if she disobeyed.
Then she took a breath, and that freaked me out even more. He should have slapped me in the face because I was really hysterical then. So he went over to her and he did the same thing, he strangled her more. And I think I watched that time, because what the hell, she's dead anyway.
Investigators found parts of Karla's story credible, After all, her bruises were real, and Paul's reputation as a violent rapist was now confirmed. But there were nagging doubts about how completely helpless Karla truly had been. Nonetheless, the priority was to stop Paul Bernardo before he could harm anyone else. On February 17, 1993, police moved in and arrested Bernardo at his St. Catharines home. The man who had eluded capture for so long was reportedly calm as officers led him away in handcuffs. A search of the house commenced that day. Investigators hoped to find physical evidence tying Paul to the murders, especially the videotapes Karla had mentioned, which supposedly captured the crimes on film. But Karla had a bombshell revelation. The videos were hidden in the house, she said, and they would show not only Paul's guilt, but also her own involvement. This put prosecutors in a tricky position. If those tapes showed Karla actively participating, her claims of being an unwilling victim could be disproven. Yet, without having seen the tapes, the prosecution had to decide how much to rely on Karla's word. In May 1993, the Canadian public would soon learn, Karla Homolka secured a controversial plea bargain that would be described in headlines as a deal with the devil. After intense negotiations, the prosecutor agreed to charge Karla with 2 counts of manslaughter, rather than murder, for the roles she played in Leslie Mahaffy's and Kristen French's deaths. In return, Karla gave a detailed sworn statement and promised to testify fully against Paul Bernardo. The agreed-upon sentence was 12 years in prison, a shockingly light penalty, many would later feel, for such horrific crimes. But at the time, prosecutors felt they had no better option. They still had not located the crucial videotapes, and the case against Paul might not hold up without Karla. In June 1993, Karla's plea deal was finalized in court. Due to the sensational nature of the case and Karla's future role as a witness, a judge placed a publication ban on the proceedings. For a while, the public knew only that Karla Homolka had pleaded guilty to something related to the murders and was sentenced to 12 years. The full extent of her involvement remained under wraps. Behind the scenes, the search for the videotapes continued feverishly. Police had combed the Bernardo house for 71 days, but with no success in finding the tapes of the assaults and murders. Unbeknownst to them, those tapes had been in the house all along, hidden in a clever spot inside a ceiling light fixture in an upstairs bathroom. Even more troubling, they were no longer there by the time the police finished their search. Paul Bernardo's first lawyer, Ken Murray, had secretly retrieved the tapes from their hiding place on May 6, 1993, after the search warrant expired. Murray took possession of 6 VHS tapes depicting the attacks on Tammy Homolka, Jane Doe, Leslie Mahaffy, and Kristen French. Karla Homolka began serving her 12-year sentence in the summer of 1993, officially convicted of manslaughter. She gave formal statements detailing the crimes, wept on cue about her trauma, and in general portrayed herself as a battered wife who did what she had to do under duress. In September 1994, a full year and a half after Karla's deal, Ken Murray withdrew from representing Paul Bernardo amid ethical troubles, and a new lawyer took over Paul's defense. Murray then handed the videotapes to the police on September 22, 1994. The authorities and the world at last saw the actual footage of the crimes in all its grotesque detail. The content was worse than anyone imagined. Not only did the tapes confirm Paul Bernardo's heinous acts, but they vividly showed Karla Homolka as an enthusiastic participant. The revelation of the videotapes caused a firestorm. Prosecutors publicly acknowledged that had they seen this evidence earlier, Homolka would also have been tried for murder alongside Paul. But a plea deal is essentially a contract, and it was too late to undo it. The outrage in Canada was palpable. The press lambasted the authorities for striking such a lenient bargain with someone who, on tape, seemed to relish brutality.
Alan, it's amazing to me that this woman, Homolka, a serial killer, what the hey is going on? Three murders that we know of.
Well, in the eyes of the Canadian justice system, she is guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter, not of murder. and she is getting out of prison after 12 years for her parts in her husband Paul Bernardo's killings of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffy, 2 teens from this area, and in the fatal drug rape of her own sister, Tammy Homolka.
In May 1995, Paul Bernardo finally went on trial for his monstrous crimes. To ensure Paul got a fair trial, the proceedings were moved to Toronto, away from the Niagara region where emotions ran highest, and strict publication bans had been enforced during Karla's earlier hearings. Despite these measures, public interest was intense. Every day, long lines of people gathered hoping to get a seat in the courtroom. The trial itself lasted 4 months and was a horrifying spectacle. The prosecution's case was anchored by 2 powerful pillars: Karla's testimony and the videotapes. Karla Homolka took the stand as the star witness for the prosecutor, spending several days calmly recounting the details of the sexual assaults and murders. In court, she described how Paul had a dark, sadistic side and how he allegedly coerced her involvement. She testified that Paul had strangled Leslie Mahaffy with an electrical cord and later killed Kristen French in the same manner, while she was too terrorized to intervene. According to Karla, she participated in the sexual assaults only under duress, claiming Paul beat her into submission and that she feared for her own life. She portrayed herself as essentially another of Paul's victims. The defense team aimed to shred Karla's credibility. During a grueling cross-examination, Paul's attorney highlighted every lie Karla had told. He suggested that Karla was not the innocent flower she pretended to be, but rather a full partner in crime, or even the more depraved of the two. The most damning evidence, however, did not come from Karla's words, but from Paul and Karla's own video recordings. The Tammy tape, as it was known, showed Karla facilitating the assault of her unconscious sister, an act that by itself shattered any illusion of Karla as merely a bystander. The visual images, described in court, of Karla dressed in Tammy's clothes and mocking her own sister's memory, or of Karla sexually assaulting the victims, made it exceedingly difficult for the defense to sell the idea that Karla was blameless. When Paul Bernardo took the stand in his own defense, he coolly admitted to kidnapping, confining, and sexually assaulting Leslie and Kristen, claiming an out-of-control sex life as his rationale, but denied murdering either girl, insisting that each died accidentally, unsupervised, in moments when Karla was alone with them. He depicted Karla as the instigator of Tammy's fatal assault. On September 1st, 1995, the jury delivered its verdict after just 8 hours of deliberation. Paul Bernardo was found guilty on all 9 counts. He was automatically sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years. The judge further declared that Bernardo be designated a dangerous offender. For many Canadians, however, the outcome was bittersweet. Karla had served only about 2 years of her 12-year term. The tapes shown at trial transformed public perception of her. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse with signs calling for Karla to be tried for murder or kept locked up forever. But legally, the deal was irreversible. Karla would walk free in a matter of years. Having completed her sentence, Karla Homolka was released from prison in July 2005 at the age of 35. She eventually remarried, and she became a mother of 3 children, living under the name Leanne Teal. Families of Leslie Mahaffy, Kristen French, and Tammy Homolka, the nightmare will never truly be over.
Only the trial is over. Leslie is still not coming home.
The question remains, how did 2 seemingly ordinary people like Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka turn into such depraved criminals? This question has fascinated and troubled psychologists, criminologists, and the public at large. Paul and Karla were a rare case of a male-female serial killer team, a phenomenon that tends to spark debates about dominance, control, and shared pathology. In trying to understand their psychology, experts have conducted numerous evaluations, especially of Karla, who has been the more enigmatic figure. In Paul Bernardo's case, the psychological profile is relatively straightforward. Paul exhibits the classic traits of a sexual sadist and psychopath. He had a troubled family background, His father was a known pedophile who molested a child and peeped into neighbors' windows. Paul's crimes escalated from voyeurism and abusive dating relationships to serial sexual abuse, to torture, and finally murder, which is tragically a pattern seen in some violent offenders when left unchecked. One might say that if Karla Homolka had never existed, Paul Bernardo still would have been a dangerous predator. Indeed, he already was one before he even met her. Karla Homolka's psychology is more complex and controversial. Over the years, at least 16 psychiatric and psychological assessments were conducted on Karla, and the conclusions varied widely. Many experts believed Karla's claim that she suffered from battered spouse syndrome and post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the abuse inflicted by Paul. These experts point out that Karla was quite young, only 17 when she met a 23-year-old Bernardo, and impressionable. Indeed, Karla did display some classic signs of an abuse victim. She was isolated from friends, controlled in many aspects of life, and punished when she disobeyed Paul. It's plausible that by the time of the murders, Karla felt there was no escape from Paul's hold over her. However, other professionals saw something far more disturbing in Karla. A few examiners concluded that Karla Homolka exhibited psychopathic traits herself, such as narcissism, manipulation, and a chilling lack of genuine remorse. These analysts argue that Karla wasn't a passive pawn at all, but rather an equally depraved personality who happened to link up with Bernardo and found an outlet for her dark desires. Finally, we are left with the question that we began with. Was the urge to kill innate in both Paul and Karla? Or was Karla dragged into darkness by Paul's influence? In the end, the Ken and Barbie Killers case is a stark reminder of the human capacity for evil and the complexity of assigning blame when manipulation and violence intertwine. What do you believe about Karla Homolka's role? Was she a pawn controlled by a violent man? Or was she an eager accomplice who found an excuse in his dominance? Should we consider her equally monstrous, or does her abuse mitigate her culpability in your eyes? Even now, decades later, the ghosts of Leslie Mahaffy, Kristen and Tammy Homolka cry out for justice and remembrance. We owe it to them to learn the lessons of this case, to improve our systems, to support victims of abuse before tragedy strikes, and to remain vigilant against those who walk among us with masks of normalcy concealing hearts of pure darkness. Thanks for watching.